Good day. This is Chris Miller. You're listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. I am really jazzed up, as you can see, with today's guest because she ties into so much of what we've been talking about through this series lately. Let me just remind you that I'm working on a show, and I am doing a show on emotions, and it's called Emotional Roller Coaster. And what I'm trying to show is how we feel things through paintings. And so I'm pairing up a song with a painting. And when you come to the show, I have a Spotify playlist, and you can hear the song while you look at the painting. And yes, I have listened to the same song over and over and over again to create these very large 72 by 48 paintings. But what's interesting about this, and why we have Dr. Jayne Gardner coming in on this phone call, is emotions can also, I love to talk about how they can walk us through the creative process, but sometimes they can hold us back. And I'm excited because she has some techniques to show us how we can work through those emotions. So Dr. Jayne Gardner is a performance coach for businesses. She has a background in therapy and consulting for family dynamics, I imagine, systems, relationships. She works through neuroplasticity. So good morning, Dr. Jayne. How are you?
Chris, hi. We cross interest here with emotions. That's so cool. I'm excited.
It is. I just, listeners, we just did a real quick run through, and I'm talking to Dr. Jayne, and I'm like, wow, I love this idea. But I want to ask you what I find so interesting. I was reading your notes, and you're talking about using the brain to help us with emotions.
That is the brain, is what I want to tell you. I want to start with telling you what changed my mind and put emotions as about the only thing I deal with when I'm working with people, is because of some research I found, and it was in the late 1999, giving away my age, but I found this study that won a Nobel Prize by two psychologists, Kahneman and Tversky. You could look it all up. I've written about it on my website. But what they found was, in short, is that we are not thinking rational human beings. We are emotionally reactive. Now, we kind of know that, but since I work in business, it helps, I think, anybody to provide research, because then our brain says, oh yeah, this emotional thing really is important. Otherwise it's so woo-woo that, sometimes I'm kicked out of business because Dr. Jayne makes me cry or whatever. But now businesses are asking me, because they get it too, that emotions are the key to thinking higher thoughts, to innovation. All of it.
I love this. Okay. You're right. Here in the West, we are just so,
Yes.
We are so against emotions. It's all up. I always say it's up here and above.
We stay in our heads.
Yeah.
And, solving any problem, we stay in our heads. And I read a book about the FBI adopting this emotional way of dealing with the hostages in these huge events where people are captured. They had been using thinking to try to figure out how to get them to let go of the hostages. And then they started realizing it was all emotional, and they got progress. They had people released in a shorter time. It was just remarkable how we have been taught to think through every problem, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the advantages, the disadvantages, and we're never taught about the emotional part of this. It's our life.
And that's interesting. So, and you're saying that can be taught to the brain, which is ironic, right? Taught to the brain or through the brain. How does that work? I mean,
yeah, so great. Let me show you in a demonstration with my hand.
All right.
Okay. So hold your hand up like this Now I want you to put your thumb across the middle. Okay. And then fold the four fingers over that. And let's play like this is your brain. Yours is probably bigger than your hand.
Maybe.
I don't know. But what happens, this is the brain. So let's look at the three parts of the brain just to break it down and make it simple. There's the thinking brain, and that's these four fingers. That's the neocortex, we call it. Thinking brain is a simplified version. And then open up your hand And your thumb right there, if you keep it against your hand, that's your visceral brain. Excuse me, your wrist is your visceral brain. The thumb is your limbic system, your emotional brain. So we've got the neocortex, the thinking brain, the feeling brain, and the visceral brain is what connects it to your body. That's why you can't just say, I'm going to stay in my head, because the brain goes all over your body. It's holistic. Okay. So here's what happens though. Think about this. When you're emotional and you have your hand all, your brain's all intact, but think about moving your thumb. If your emotional brain is emotional, it gets bigger and excited. And guess what it does? It kicks out your thinking brain. And here you are being led around by your emotions. That's what we do.
That's a great visual, by the way.
And so emotions are more powerful in the brain than thoughts. A fact. 3 facts. Let me give you 3 facts about neuroscience, and then I can refer back to them. One is that emotions are more powerful in your brain than thoughts. And I think I just illustrated why. Second is that in order to get past negative emotions, you have to approach them rather than avoid them. Okay, because we tend to think, oh, I'm really upset. Breathe. Calm down, calm down. When really that doesn't do it. The emotion is still there, waving you and controlling you. You're just now breathing on top of it. Okay, so the only way to dissipate high emotion, negative emotion, is to feel it and go into it and be aware of it, and then it disappears. The third thing is that I know about the brain is buried emotions never die. They make us sick. So in America, especially the West, we decide when you feel, just don't think about it. And so what happens? You push it down, the visceral brain takes over and says, okay, I'll go put that around your heart or your liver or, your muscle group. So it freezes you, or it does all sorts of things to your body. It's so hard, Chris, to let people know they have to deal with their emotions through walking into them. Anger, you tell somebody, well, just feel it and get into it. And they go, oh no, I would lose it. I might kill somebody. I might, they go to the worst possible thing about anger. And I've been taught growing up that anger was negative. Just don't do it. I wasn't ever given any ways to deal with it. I don't know if you could say more about this. This is just an approach for women, or whether boys get the same message, but for women.
It's funny. It's interesting, isn't it? It's different, but the same. Women are not allowed to be angry, but boys are not allowed to cry.
Yeah, that's the point. It's still emotion.
It's still emotion.
It's still denying the feelings, isn't it?
Right. As a boy, you're like, don't whine, don't complain, don't cry.
Don't be weak. Don't be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Well, girls that are angry, we have a word for that. So, it really impresses your brain. This is where your brain comes in, because the things that happen to us growing up, the experiences, wire our brain with our belief system. Okay. So if as a little girl, you heard something that made you think anger is bad, then you could live your whole life pushing anger down, not feeling it, erupting with it because you didn't deal with it, and never even know where it came from.
Right.
Literally, that's what I do in companies, is I help people see that the assumptions you made as a kid form your belief system, and they unconsciously are leading you around. I'm not good enough. I can't do art,
Yeah.
I wanted to be an artist when I was a junior in high school. I decided I wanted to go to New York, get an apartment there, and be an artist. I didn't even know if I wanted to go to school, but I wanted to be an artist. Okay. But you know what my mom and dad said? Well, they said, okay, do that, but first you've got to get a teaching degree.
Oh, yeah. My parents too, right? Play it safe. They were like,
Yeah,
first you have to be a salesperson.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that'll never make money. So you better.
Exactly. So you said you do art. What do you still do art?
I do. I love it, but you're inspiring me to do more of it because I end up like being a serial artist. I do it for, like a year and then I stop for 4 years or I do it. So I'm not consistent with it.
Well, it's interesting. So I wrote my book a couple of years, I think more than 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago during COVID. And I want to tell you something. I left out anything about emotion. I didn't even put a chapter in about emotion. So you're gonna find this interesting.
Wow, that's interesting.
I just was like, it's all up here. It's how you think about the
Yeah, I
process,
did
how you
that for
think.
most of my life.
Yeah. And you know what I did is, so then this last January, I actually added 5 chapters to the book. I republished it with more, and I added emotion because emotion is part of who we are.
It drives us. Mm-hmm.
A
It
big
really
part. In
does
fact,
drive us.
you could write a whole book on, I could go back and write a whole book on just emotions. So, I like to teach people to use it as a tool. And I consider, like, if I'm in the art room, if you're painting and you're sad, use that as a tool to let the sadness flow through you and express it.
Oh, love it.
And I think we're afraid, I did a
Oh,
painting.
yeah.
I did a painting like 5 years ago. My father had passed away and I was having a bad time of it. It was really hard. And I went into the studio and I did this really, really dark painting. I thought it was dark.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, at the next show I had, the first person that came in went straight to that painting and bought it like that because she resonated with it. There was something in it, some sadness, the loss that she resonated with. And so she went straight to it. So I think emotions are good, right? I mean,
yeah, that's a good reframe because I do think we think the negative ones are bad.
Right.
So that's a great point. And painting helps you express them, is what you're saying.
And just like you were saying, and I love your demonstration. If you don't let that out, it will come down. And so I feel like the art room, creativity for all the listeners, being creative is a way to let those emotions flow through you.
I love that. Absolutely. And onto the canvas.
Yeah. Or into the clay or onto the whatever you're making, whether it's clothing, let it flow through you. But you're right. We are scared to show the dark sides. And that holds us back. So here's something interesting I want to put before you.
Well, I got to stop you for a minute because I'm just enjoying this so much. It's like somebody is finally listening to me. So it feels good.
Love this. I know. I love this. I love this. I could really go to town with this conversation. So I had something interesting happening with me as we talked about. I'm doing the show and I'm painting all these paintings and they've come pretty good. But I'll tell you what I'm having an issue with, which is really funny. I haven't done happy. It's the one painting I haven't finished. So I've done sad, melancholy, angry. I even did a painting. There's one in the series for reverence, which is a sense of awe.
Ooh.
But I'm kind of being blocked on happy, which is kind of a flip for you. I'm sure you don't have anybody come to you and say, well, what if someone has a block on feeling happy? How do we use your methodology on the brain and how do we walk through that?
Yeah, I think you have to really realize that there's an emotional continuum, happy's on one end and maybe sad's on the other. And so the more you can work through and get out of sad and deal with sad, the more happy is going to naturally appear for you. Because you just tell somebody to be happy and it's kind of like, I don't know how to do that. Just like you don't know how to be sad if you're not sad. So emotions are, just like you say, they are running through you all of the time. And something happens and we feel, because we have a brain that says, oh, that's bad or that's good. And then we feel. So the more you work with your emotions and allow the ones that come naturally to be there, to evolve. And I'll give you some tips about how to lengthen that out, how to really savor your emotions. the good, the bad, and the ugly ones.
I love that. I love that. So what I'm hearing is, see, it's what our society does, right? So teaching me, I'm doing the show and I want it to be balanced, right? I don't want you to come and experience sad, 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 sad. I want you to have a roller coaster. So I'm feeling
Yeah, I
this
like that.
pressure to show happy,
Mhm.
but you're right. If you don't go through all the sad or angry or whatever, maybe it's blocking it, or maybe I'm
Well,
afraid.
yeah, some of the most unhappy people I know are people that are holding on to their anger. And they may be unconsciously doing that, but you've known people who just look snarly mad all the time. Well, that's what's blocking them from being happy. You can't go to happy unless you go through each emotion. I'll send you your listeners a chart that shows the power of each emotion, because different emotions have different powers. And one of the most powerful ones is anger. And so if you went up, you'd have sadness and grief. Shame is the bottom. That's probably very, very powerful in a negative way. But as you climb up through guilt and shame and happiness or sadness, you're going to get to this transition of anger. And then when you get through anger, you go to awareness, bliss, happiness, joy. But you got to walk through the anger to get there. You can't circumvent it.
And so anger is higher up in the
Yes,
sense that
it's higher up than sadness. If you're feeling sad, get mad. It'll go away. Because a lot of times anger is such a pushed aside emotion that we have so much of it blocking us that it gets in the way. It makes our lives messy. I'll put it that way.
Oh, I think that's really interesting. I've heard people say that, I think it was Abraham Hicks. She has talked about sometimes, feeling the anger is actually healthy for you.
Yes, yes. In fact, I wish I had it in here, but I have an anger bat myself. And it's right by my bed. And so I act out my anger. It's private. I'm not going to tell anybody that, oh, I'm mad at you. I'm in here beating a pillow about you. But I do that every morning about the day before, because there's somewhere in there that something happened that upset me. Maybe the degree of anger is sometimes greater, but there's a frustration, an annoyance, something. So much so that my grandchildren, I gave them all baby bats, baby anger bats.
I love it.
Because I didn't want them to grow up being afraid of it. And just yesterday, one of my granddaughter was here, and she has a twin sister. And believe me, there's a lot of anger there. Sisters, twins.
Oh yeah, twins.
And so Nola came in there. She said, "Grandma, you're not going to believe what Poppy just did." And so, needless to say, after she told me, I said, "Why don't you?" And she said, "Yeah, I know. I'm going to go get my anger back because I am so mad." Well,
I love it.
She went in my bedroom and came out fine, and they went on. They didn't even have to solve anything,
I love that. I love the fact that you're talking about it too. I'm going, I love that you're admitting that.
I know, because we think of it as so bad,
Right. We're not taught to. I was raised Catholic, and it's all about you.
Yes.
You just don't. You hold all that back, and everybody around you is more important than how you feel.
I was raised a girl, and it's the same thing.
Same thing. So let me ask you this. This is a really interesting question. I love this because I can tell. I believe that the gifts that we bring to life are often harvested from our growing up challenges.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So did you feel that you had a lot of that emotion repressed when you were younger?
I don't remember ever getting mad in my childhood, ever. But what I decided, so the belief system that came out of that was contorted about who I was. And so one of the ways you can tell what emotions have done to you is that if you wrote out and just labeled all of your memories that you remember, if you remember this or that was the point in your life. The only reason the brain remembers anything is because there's danger in it, because it's a protective thing. So the brain remembers things to protect you. And mostly the things you remember are about negative emotions. Something happened negative. Now, yeah, you remember in your own vacation and, you're looking at a sunset, you may have those type of memories, but the brain doesn't think they're very important. It'll let them slide and replace your whole memory bank with stuff that is upsetting to you. I'll tell a story on myself, because this is what I do with CEOs and leaders. If you can imagine, me doing this with a CEO, you'll laugh, but I'll ask him, what's the first memory you have? Well, this isn't my first, but here's a memory that influenced me. When I was 13 years old, I had two brothers and they worked in the family business. And I wanted to be a part of that. I was a girl, and my father thought, I don't want you to come to this messy, dirty factory and work. So he kept saying, Mom, take her shopping or something. Well, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be a part of things. So one summer, my mother talked him into giving me a job, because my brothers always worked in the summer. Well, he gave me this job. I walked in, he was going to keep me in the business office. I really wanted to go out where my brothers were delivering and in the factory making things. But anyway, he knew I was good at art. So he gave me a book of all of the products that he has. And he says, I want you to draw a picture of each one of these. Well, it kind of hit my gift, So I spent all summer, I got some colors and some tracing paper, but some just art stuff. And I just drew the most beautiful pictures, colored them, everything. And I gave them to him. I bound them and I gave them to him at the end of the summer. And he looked at me, he looked at me, he said, oh, these are so good, blah, blah, blah. And I walked out thinking, I'm going to run this company someday, But got to the car and I'd forgotten the colored pencils and I needed them for school beginning. So I ran back in and he wasn't in his office. But guess what I found?
Oh, no.
Yeah, he had taken the pictures and dumped them in the trash. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I know. It makes me sad to today. But
this is good, though. This is all
is,
good because we're going to work with this. I love this idea, and I'll tell you why. But go ahead. What is the thing about
I just want to say, I didn't tell anybody I think I was in graduate school before I had the vulnerability intact to be able to tell that story, because all I did was close down, and I made my mind up right then. I am not good enough to work in business. I just arbitrarily said, I can't do it. That was how I came out of that. And so when I was graduated from PhD, wanted to go into family therapy, I did that for several years. And then I wanted to transfer into business, but I was stuck. I don't know. I didn't know what was wrong. I just couldn't do it. I had no idea. Like you said, you sit in front of the empty canvas and you have no idea why you can't paint. So finally, my husband, darn it, told me, he said, why don't you use your own stuff here?
Oh, good for him.
And try to remember something where something happened that held you back. And so that's when I remembered that memory. And then I reframed it, I rewired it, and I said, I am an exceptionally successful businesswoman, and started saying that to myself and switched into business, and I'm doing great,
Let's talk about this. Oh my gosh, I love this. I'm getting goosebumps because I love this. So when I present to groups, I have them do a regression, and I have them remember one of their very first experiences doing art.
Oh,
so,
yes.
Because it sets us up. It sets us up for
a
whole life.
Either we like it or we don't.
Either we're told it's good, either mom puts it on the fridge or dad makes fun of it, or the reverse.
Oh gosh, yeah. We decide we're an artist or not.
And we have the choice to move that. So you obviously, what did you do? How did you, and have you done it fully? You did it for the business side, but have you managed to release any of that for your artist the artist within you?
Oh my goodness. I just had cold chills. Oh, Chris, I literally, oh my goodness. Thank you for asking me that question. I
Because
don't,
I believe we're all artists and we're all creative. And so
oh, I do too.
how do I
Mm,
love this.
that's rich. Thank you for that. I leave with taking something in my back pocket, sure. To answer your question, it became important to me to develop a system on how to unprogram things. And so that's why I know so much about how the brain works, because I thought I have to study the brain, neuroscience, to understand how to rewire the brain. Because that's really what you're looking at is you've thought that for 20 years. So your brain has this neural pathway in there that is big and bold, and you go there immediately when you think about art or business, whatever, you're triggered
Oh,
with,
okay. So Dr. Jayne, I'm going to tell you my shaming story, which I share when I speak. So when I was a kid, I was picked out as an art showing promise as an artist.
Yeah.
And I was in Pittsburgh and they had an art school at Carnegie Mellon for
Oh
kids.
my goodness, did they ever have an art school?
Yeah. So we would get in the car, my brother and I, and a couple neighborhood kids that were talented. And my father would drive us all the way down to the city where we'd go to Carnegie Mellon and we'd farm into this huge auditorium. It was one of these tiered, like 3-story high auditoriums.
Big.
And the teacher would stand up on the stage and his name was Mr. Fitzgerald. And he would sit up
You
there.
still remember him?
Oh, I remember it exactly. And he stood up there and he had these easels behind him on the stage. And if you were a really good artist from the week before, he picked you out and you could stand up there and recreate what you did. Well, I'm sitting there. I was probably 10 or 11 and I was a talker. I'm always a talker. And this girl behind me starts tapping on the shoulder and I turn to talk to her. And Mr. Fitzgerald in front of this room. And when I say there were 1,500 people in this room, he turns and he goes, "You get up." He says, "You have the audacity to talk while I speak."
Oh no.
And he says, "Take your stuff, walk out of here." I had to pick up my tray and my crayons. My brother just sat there, right? And I walked out. And the worst part was I had to sit in the lobby. And when class was over, they
had to
all
see you.
Walked past me sitting
The
there.
walk of shame.
It was such a walk of shame. I got out into the car. I threw my pencils. You talk about your pencil box, right? I threw it and I said to my father, "I am not an artist. I will never be an artist." And I totally turned my back on creativity.
So sad. Oh, that's so sad.
So I love
that's what we do.
We do, right?
We have a 10-year-old brain leading us
through our lives.
And
unless we take that mind by our hands or the emotions by our hands and turn it around, we will live our whole lives not being who we were intrinsically born to be.
I know, that's what keeps our potential just squashed.
So what did you do to get yourself into to release the business that you couldn't be? Tell us about your system here. And hopefully there are people listening to this, and I'm sure everybody has some sort of shaming.
Of course we do.
With art, creativity. So how do you do this?
I'm glad you asked, because I presented it when I said I just started telling myself a new belief. That wouldn't do anything, actually, because it's like trying to paste new wallpaper over old wallpaper. I still believed that in the emotional part of my body. So my brain up here telling me, "Oh, you're a great business person," it just discount it. But what you have to do is you have to go back and release that emotion that you had at the time. Okay. So for instance, you have to go back and talk to that little 10-year-old boy and ask him how he felt and write about it and scream about it and get mad about it. The mad turns it all the other way. And then after you've released that anger, and you have to get to anger to do this, or it won't ever release.
Oh, I love this. I love this because you're telling me something that I don't think a lot of us realize. We realize that you have to feel the emotion, but we don't ever say into the point of anger.
Well, because you have to become your own advocate. It's like you're watching that little 10-year-old, and now you're the adult, and you say, "Chris, that is horrible. That was terrible what was done to you. I am so mad at that Fitzgerald," or whatever his name was, and you show that child that it was wrong. And you say, "I want you to get mad at him too." And then you go take your anger bath and you really do a workout and you have him watching you. You're the adult, and you say, that guy's horrible. He should be blah, blah, blah. You know, this is when you're allowed to say all the words you want to,
Well, I love it
ugly
because,
words.
well, because as a child, and everybody experiences this, any type of abuse,
Oh,
you take it that I did something wrong. So in this case, it seems obvious. It's because I talk too much. And that also can shut down that. I should not speak aloud. I should never speak aloud because I get, and so, you know, I don't know, as a child, it's hard to see that. It's hard to get to the adult
It is.
brain, right?
It is, to shift back and forth like that. But you can do it if you know that's the job. I've got some tools that I can help you with. But one thing I want to give the listeners is there's another powerful thing you can do to help yourself stay in a higher, happy state. If you're trying to do that, is remember a time when as a child you were very happy. Okay. And go back and relive that and savor, try to remember what it felt like. Say you were, one of my memories like that is riding my bike out of that garage, and that free, you can feel that wind blowing in your face. You're 6 years old, but you think you have all the power in the world, you know, and that I can still feel that wind on my face and feeling like I can do anything. I can go anywhere I want now. Freedom, you know. And so the brain will go back there with you if you take it, and then just start thinking about that as a replacement too, because you need to accumulate some of those. It's like a collection, a repertoire of good memories that you can return to get out of a bad mood. Now, you do have to do your work and work through some of those negative ones, or they cloud the happy ones. But once you get through the first half of my course, which is relieving all that negativity, then you learn to direct your brain yourself and say, today, I want to feel happy. I remember the first time I ever painted. I loved it, you know, whatever you want to think about.
I was thinking about what you said earlier, how the brain always remembers the traumatic things. So I imagine as you get to a certain age in your life, you just have this whole list of, unless you deal with them, right? Unless you clean them, it's sort of like a computer drive getting all this junk on there. You have to clean it up.
That's why I say buried emotions never die unless you rewire them, because you collect them, and your limbic system, that thumb part, is a storehouse. And the more you collect them and don't process them, it gets bigger and bigger. It swells up. If you're looking at an MRI, you would see your limbic system was ragged and irritated. And then it's more likely that you get sick and have illness because a lot of energy is used toward keeping it quiet. You know, and addictions are always about trying to settle down all that old emotion, because someone will come to me and want to break an addiction, and I'll just take them back and say, undo all that, and then you don't crave that sugar anymore or that cigarette.
I love that. I've interviewed a woman a while back. She's a hypnotherapist, and she talks about that. Let me ask you a question. When you talk about the limbic, how is that related to your nervous system? Is that related to your nervous system?
Well, the limbic system is your emotional brain, where, you know, everything that you happen, and see, it's closer to your body than the thinking brain. And in actuality, the neocortex, what didn't develop in our history until this, we were running a long time on our emotional, and then, you know, evolutionary, we developed a higher level thinking brain, but the emotional brain is attached closer to your visceral body. So the emotions, that's why they run your entire physical body. And I've forgotten your question. I'm getting so involved.
Well, what I was interested in, and I love that, because you're talking about it's closer to your body. There's so much information these days. I'm hearing about nervous system issues.
Oh, sure.
With people in general. And for me, I have issues with the nervous system, and I'm wondering how that relates to our emotions. You know,
so there's a concept called somatization. And so when we don't process all of that in our emotional brain, it slips down into the cells of our body, and it settles into your muscles or your heart, or literally it takes over because it gets into your nervous system from the visceral brain. It's hooked to your spinal cord, so your body is literally your emotions,
Mm.
and so if what I'll tell people is if they have a headache or a toe ache or whatever the physical problem is, I'll tell you that it's attached to a negative thought about yourself that has settled into your body.
Okay, say that again now, because that was really
Okay.
good.
Yeah. I don't know if I explained it well, but
no, when you
let
have
me give an example.
a physical issue,
Yeah.
it is related to some sort of emotional thought.
And there's a woman, Louise Hay, and she's written a book and she has a whole list. Are you familiar with her?
Yes, I am. I actually have her.
Probably got that one.
Yeah, I love that book.
And that's all she did was say, if you have a headache, it means you're blocking your thinking is not clear. That she'll say your negative belief is, I can't figure this out, I'm confused. Or if you have a sinus headache or something, it's always about mental clarity that's causing that clouding in you. So you solve the thinking problem and it goes away. She had cancer, and that's how she healed her cancer.
She made the connection. I want to go back to something you said, and I want to share this with our listeners because I want to make this recommendation. I have spent my life going to coaching and therapy. I will tell people that.
Me too.
And I can't tell you how many listeners, if you're listening to this right now and you have never gone to a coach or a therapist, you're doing yourself such a disservice because they are trained to help walk you through this healing of these emotions that ultimately it's going to come out. You can't just you won't make it to the finish line.
It's true. That is so true.
And I know so many
or
people.
You'll get to the finish line a lot quicker.
There's a shame in our society about going, people should be running around going, hi, I'm Chris Miller and I go see a therapist. There's a shame in our society about so many people afraid to ask for help, or it's not even help, it's co-creating with someone else, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I just want to show you, if you're listening to this podcast and you have never gone to that's your goal this week.
Our recommendation is
to step out there, because like we talk about, this stuff is collecting up. It's collecting up in your memory, in your mental brain, right?
It's how I maintain my energy, because the anger workout every morning releases it all. I want to keep it cleaned out every time. I have a procedure that's a 3-day retreat that you go off and empty all the old stuff, but after that you've got it cleaned out. But now things happen, still that you park the emotions in there. So you have to really, it's like hoarding emotion. We have trouble letting go of them, I think.
So I'm going to go back to what you said about you have to reach to that point of anger, feel it, and then it's released. Or is this something?
While I'm thinking about it, there are 2 or 3 articles on my website that are free to your download about how this works in more detail. I've written for several magazines that have published it. Emotional Intelligence being one magazine that has published, and the article I wrote for them was called The Scream Effect. And what you've never heard this before, but when you scream, your sound goes, and it's the only sound that goes directly into your auditory, I don't know the ear well enough, but it goes directly to the part of the ear that then alerts your emotional brain. It goes and your emotional brain is there. So screaming is the fastest way to release any kind of emotion. So this is so funny, Chris. I was hired to help a group of truckers, guys that, drive trucks around all day long and talk about resistance to therapy. They weren't real sure about me. But what I taught them was, I said, okay, guys, this is what you get, and girls, when you've been driving 3 or 4 hours, you're tired, stop at a rest station and go out in a field or lock your door and scream as loud as you can. And I mean, these people loved it. And they started it started just getting a kind of a running through the trucker community. And so I wrote an article about it that's published on my website because they loved it. And it's so easy that way. You don't have to go, it's not, doesn't take away all the old, but it certainly releases something for you.
Yeah, because I think so many of us, especially men, we're taught not to show that, not to, I mean,
Not
we're
to
allowed to get
scream.
angry, but not to get screaming is more,
I know.
it's different, right? I mean,
Yes, it is.
yelling, well, they could yell, but screaming, like,
I
yeah.
know.
So you actually have an article about that, about just like,
Yeah. Yeah, my website's drjaynegardner.com. You can find, I have probably 30 or 40 articles on it that you're free to read. So, if it's interesting and you want to read more,
Well,
but
I
I
love
gotta
it.
ask you a question.
Yes.
I've been looking at that picture behind you. So tell me what emotion is in that.
That's interesting.
Or maybe that was one before you
No,
did
no,
an
it's not.
emotion.
It was actually one of my test paintings. So when I came up with
Oh.
this concept to do the show, I started listening to some music, and that is painted based on a song. I will tell you, let me see here. I'm gonna pull it up. It is an artist that I really love. And his name is Michael, I think it's Kiwanuka.
Oh.
And that's what I realized. Let me see if I can get the spelling for you. I realized, yeah, his last name is Kiwanuka, Michael Kiwanuka.
Okay.
Such emotion in his music. It's very powerful. And I don't know if it might have been love or passion, but he sings all over. In fact, one of the paintings in my show has a song of his to it because I so connect to his voice. And that's why certain artists,
right. Yeah.
that's why I would tell an artist listening to this, you want your work to transcend the mind and communicate emotion. When we see good work, it's emotion, right? And have you ever seen a painting that is technically perfect, right? The face, the drawing, the shadow is perfect, but
nothing there.
Right. And then sometimes you can see a scribble on a wall.
That's so true.
And you're like, oh, what is that?
You understand everything within that one line. That's a true gifted artist. Oh gosh.
Yeah. So you want to get your emotion into that work. And so like you're talking about, that's why I was asking you with that. It sounds like you went back and you cleared the business side, but maybe you could go and throw that bat around and clear some of that. I'm not an artist, because you're an artist. And you were probably a really darn good, that was his failure not to see that.
Well, and then, they told me not to go major in art. So got another one,
How debilitating that is for your career.
Oh man, I can't wait to try this. I'll let you know.
So, I just love the whole conversation and the idea. And so it's there, when we think about emotions in our brain, we kind of think of them as separate, but you're actually saying
You can see them in your head now, I hope, where they are and feel them. Yeah. And I'll tell you about one way to know if you're angry or not is if you've looking past your day and you're thinking, I didn't really get mad today. Well, did you get annoyed or did you get frustrated? Because we have put anger on the back burner so much that we can't even say when we're mad, but it may come a little bit to you and you discount it. But if you even have an indication that you might be mad, you are, like I was interviewed for doing a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I knew I didn't want to do it once he started talking. I just knew I wasn't going to fit. So I said something to him and then he shamed me. And I know, but we don't even know sometimes. And so I thought, did he really say that? And I tried to discount it. And then all of a sudden I went, oh, it doesn't matter. That's what I felt. I don't care if he meant to do that or not. I felt upset. And that's what you have to own. Don't try to go into, did they really need to hurt me? It doesn't matter. They hurt you. Go with that.
I love that. No, it is true. And we all, well, I'll speak for myself. I do the same thing. I'll be sitting there going, oh, maybe I misread it. Or
Yes,
maybe I
yes.
imagined that. That
See,
wasn't
you're
really
up in your
there.
head. You're
Yeah.
up in your head trying to deal with an emotional thing. It's not going to work.
And I think I interviewed someone a while back, and I've also been doing some reading on your heart. So your heart feels that. They use the heart as the imagery of what you're feeling. And you feel the truth of something. Oftentimes we feel the truth, but we let our mind talk us out of it.
Out of it. Our heart runs. It's just like that's the emotion in your body is your heart. Mhm.
And so listen to that guidance and what that guy did to you. And actually you should pat yourself on the back because you did listen to your guidance. You immediately sensed it wasn't a good situation. And you were like, okay, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Now,
I turned him down, but then he shamed me for turning him down, and so it just went.
And then you just go, well, I really made a good decision. You're like, I definitely made a good decision on this one.
That's right. Bingo. I got it. You saved myself a lot of problems.
So you did, but you know what? That's even so many of us, we feel that impulse and then we go through it anyway, right? You meet someone and you finish the date, you just suffer through it.
Even though I believe it's divine guidance,
Yeah.
I really do. I believe it's your divine intelligence when you rise above your thinking brain. And actually, when you get rid of all that stored up emotion, you actually equalize the power, integrate the emotional brain and the thinking brain so that your creativity is going to go through the roof. Your innovation, it's the height of potentiality is doing that.
I love that. Is that in one of your books? Or if not, it should be. That's wonderful. Integrating your mental intelligence to your emotional.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So have we covered everything? You mentioned some steps, and
let me look. I think we did. Let's see. Oh, well, I have a few pointers.
Let's do that.
Do we have time for that?
Oh, we do.
Okay. Well, I have them written here, but what I want to say is that in order to really not let your emotions dominate you, you have to be aware. That's the first step. Just like I said, you have to really listen and know that your intuition and your heart is right. So that first step of not letting emotions control your life is being aware of them. Okay. And the next step is taking action. And by action, I've talked a lot about, taking a bath and taking it out of your body. That's one way. Another way is to write about it. But I have a special way that you write about it. I want you to write about it in first person. Say, I felt so shamed when that happened. But the next step is write about it in the third person as the observer. And then you back off from it and you don't let it control you so much. So those 4 steps help me a lot when I'm trying to discern, am I emotional? Well, yeah, if I'm trying to decide, I am. So I think what happened, and I really write about it, and then, let it go that way. Because remember, you approach an emotion, a negative emotion, to let it dissipate, not avoid it.
I love that. I had, I'm going to share a story with that. I had some issues with anxiety a few years back, where I had IBS issues. Oh, yeah. And I started getting and I tried to avoid them. So when you have something like that, you just avoid them, meaning I'm just not going to put myself in a situation where it would ever be a problem.
Yeah, good luck. No people in your life.
Right. So you stop doing things. You stop going to places. You stop going to restaurants. You stop going to theater. You stop going to places because you're worried about it. So I realized back then, I went out and bought a book about it. And it's exactly what you said. We have to face our fear. And I would say face the emotion. If we don't, it's going to get bigger and bigger.
It grows.
It grows.
Well, the other thing to be cautious about when you're hiring a therapist or a coach is many of us are so empathetic. That's kind of why we go into the field, that early in training therapists, I think I was trained to be this way, is you come in and you say, I'm so mad, blah, blah, blah. What did I do? I tried to calm you down. Or I'm so sad. Oh, well, here's a Kleenex and let me help you get happy. I thought that was my job. In the long run, what I was teaching someone, though, was to avoid getting into your feelings in my office because I wasn't comfortable with it myself. And so just be aware that you want to hire a therapist who, first of all, does their own work and ask those questions. And how do you deal with emotions? Just do an interview before you really pick someone.
And notice if they are accepting of
Mhm.
your emotions. I love
Mhm.
that. That's a great piece of advice because
we put those people in authority places, and when we don't really question what they're doing, no, stop that. It's your body.
I'm in a book club and we're reading a Brene Brown book. I Thought It Was Me, I think it's called.
Yes, I love that.
And she talks about shaming, and she talks about, like you're just saying, authority figures, doctors, lawyers,
yes,
professional coaches. We put them up here when we need to not. We need to be able to be totally right. They're a partner. And we need to be able to be forthright and say, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. And if they're not, like if you go into and you say, I need someone that can accept this. And if there's resistance,
no, out of there.
Trust the heart space, right? Trust the heart and turn out like you just did with that podcast. This is not right. So I love that advice. And I love that something else. I get all these little pins as you talk. I'm like, that's a good point. So I love how you talk about personalizing it. I felt this, I felt that, but I really love the second step, which is, I call it the Jerry Seinfeld treatment. So there was an episode back in the day where Elaine thinks a guy at the gym has a crush on her. And he do you remember this episode? He goes, Jerry thinks you're hot. Jerry really wants, and she's like, she thinks it's another guy in the room, but it's him. So I call it my Seinfeld treatment. So I have learned, when I was learning to watch my thoughts. So as an artist, I watch my thoughts. I learned to speak. Chris is getting angry right now. Chris,
third person.
Hurt Chris's feelings.
Yeah, it's so important, I think, to take that viewpoint and to also not make up stories. Because when we go up to our head and say, oh, he probably doesn't really like me, or, whatever it is we make up that we think they're thinking, that's when we get off our emotions and just try to analyze it. Those stories we make up.
And when we third person it makes it, we can take, it's a little softer. And I'm like, oh, Chris doesn't like this. And I go like this, as the keeper of Chris.
Yeah.
So as the keeper of Chris, I'm going to make sure he's safe.
Yeah. The other thing that I had developed, and I had a client when I was first working that was imprisoned, and I was working with him. So he had killed a person. And I tried out my system on him. It was early in my career, and I had figured out the system. And so I thought, what better place could I try it on? What does he think? Well, we worked through it, and he had a lot piled up, as you can imagine, or, you wouldn't kill somebody. But he came to me the last day we were going to meet, and he was holding his journal, and he looked at me and he said, Dr. Jayne, is this thing glowing? And I said, why do you say that? And he said, because God wrote back to me today. And second person is how God writes to you. And it'll usually happen spontaneously while you're journaling. I'll just turn into second person, and I'll say, Jayne, do you really know what you're doing here? Come on, and all of a sudden it's like somebody else is talking to me. It's beautiful.
Once again, this is the third time, by the way, this is an all-time high in a podcast. I'm getting goosebumps again, because I've had that experience. I journal, I do what's called morning pages, and suddenly the paragraph changes.
Yes, it does.
And it's telling me something, and it'll even say something like, Chris is just being pushy here. Like literally it jumps into, just be patient. It's all coming.
I know.
And I'm like,
his voice tries to calm, has to help or something.
I'm like, who is that? Right?
Yes.
You're right. That is divine intelligence speaking to you.
Yeah.
What a wonderful experience to have with that guy.
I know. He was such a lovely man. I have such a high opinion of him, because he was the one, when we finished, he was going away, but he told me, he said, you've changed my life. He said, I want you to publish this in a book. And so he was my biggest encourager to, develop it further and to know it was important, I guess, is how he impressed me.
And even then I would even say Spirit is speaking through him, saying, hey, I want you to publish this. I love that story. What a great way to end this podcast. I am planning a retreat. My whole goal with the spiritual artist is to work up to these week-long retreats where I help people artistically as well as spiritually working through, because
sign me up.
Oh, cool. There's one in November. It's coming up in November. And it's local. It's going to be at Texoma Lake. So I'll tell you about it. But one of the things you brought up that I really love, and I've been thinking about already to incorporate into this retreat on the first night, is some sort of a recognition of your childhood, of what you felt with art, and releasing it. Releasing it. And there's all sorts of rituals. I'm planning a bonfire ritual, but where you because you're right, those things just stay there. That experience and that man saying, you get out of this room for me, that left such a mark. Oh, I want to share one other thing with our listeners in case I was like you. I was like, well, maybe I imagined this bigger than it was.
Don't you do that a lot?
So get this, that was up north. That was in Pennsylvania. I moved down to Texas. And I was interviewing a woman probably 15 years later for a job. And I told her that story. Do you know what she said? She said, I was in the room when that happened.
Oh, no, you're kidding.
She goes, I was on the second balcony and we all felt so bad for you.
That gives me cold chills. Well, what that says, that's a, synchronicity is what Carl Jung said it. And it's always divine. It's always the divine coming back to you.
So not only did it traumatize me, but on some form, it traumatized her.
Everybody in that room was scared to death after that. Right. Don't you think? I mean, I would have.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, you remember that? She was like,
unbelievable. So you can remember, that's a good point. You can remember what happens to other people, your siblings, and they can become part of your belief system too. I didn't think of that.
Love it. I love this interview, and I'm sure we'll talk again. If you send me that paper about the levels of the emotion, I will put it, folks. It'll be on my website. If you go to spiritualartisttoday.com, there's a page where you can download case studies and worksheets, and I'll put that up there for you. And
that'd
also, I'm going to tell the listeners to go to your website and get read some of those articles you've written about this material.
Yeah, I love that. Or just rummage through them until you find one that interests you.
Yeah. And I know you do coaching. Do you do it online, or is it all in person, or
both, Chris? During the pandemic, that's all I did was online, but I worked so much. And so I love to go in the company, and work face to face. So I love that. But some people prefer a Zoom, but they don't have to drive, or they don't have to, relate so quickly. They don't have to dress up. So yeah.
So people listening, someone could be listening to this in New York, and they can use you to walk through some issues.
Oh, I would love that. Yes. Call me.
I love it. Well, thanks again. So I want to thank you, listeners, for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Make sure you follow the podcast. This is going to be on YouTube, where you can see us talking. It's also on the podcast players, where you can just hear us while you drive to work or to your next art retreat or wherever. So once again, thanks again. And Dr. Jayne, this has been great. Like I said, 3. You got the 3 goosebump meter going. So I hope to have you back soon in the future, and you have a great day.
Thank you. Enjoyed it, Chris. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Bye-bye.